The fellowship of the Holy Ghost be with us all evermore. Amen.
Good morning, members. I have received correspondence from the Honorable Member for Vieux-Fort North, who is out of state and unable to attend today's sitting. And I have also received word from the Honorable Dr. Gail Rigobert, who is unable to attend today's sitting. Please join me in welcoming the students of the Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. I'm hoping that they will have a wonderful time with us this morning and at least learn something as to the parliamentary system that we have here in St. Lucia. I wish to congratulate the St. Lucia OECS swim team who broke 9 OECS records. Special congratulations goes out to the following swimmers: Tristan Dorville, Antoine Destin, Carrick Charles, DeAndre Blanchard, Jehan Odlam Smith, Renako Daniel, Farron Herald, and Faith Jeffrey. Let me also congratulate the West Indies women's team for the victories in the matches played here in St. Lucia and wish them all the best in their future endeavors. Honorable members, one more note. Let's take this opportunity, whether you do it collectively or you want to do it individually, but I think it is only fitting. I'm not going to ask you to join me to sing, but it is the Prime Minister's birthday today, and I think we could give him a happy birthday and hope he can see many, many more. Okay? Statement by ministers. Papers to be laid. The Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 87 of 2018, Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court, Electronic Litigation Filing and Service Procedure Rules. Statutory Instrument Number 89 of 2018, St. Lucia National Housing Corporation, Derriere Morne, Vieux-Fort, Vesting Order. Statutory Instrument Number 95 of 2018, Income Tax Double Taxation Relief, United Kingdom Revocation Order. Statutory Instrument Number 97 of 2018, Excise Tax Amendment of Schedule 1, Number 15 Order.
Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Investment, Enterprise, Development, and Consumer Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers standing in my name. Statutory Instrument Number 91 of 2018, Standards Amendment Number 1 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 92 of 2018, Standards Amendment Number 2 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 93 of 2018, Standards Compulsory Standard Amendment Number 2 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 94 of 2018, Standards Compulsory Standard Amendment Number 3 Order. Statutory Instrument Number 96 of 2018, Price Control Amendment Number 15 Order. Thank you.
Honorable Minister for Commerce, Industry, Investment, Minister of Tourism, Information Broadcasting, Culture and Creative Industries.
Mr. Speaker, I stand to raise the following papers in my name. Mr. Speaker, Statutory Instrument Number 88 of 2018, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, Wild Serenity, St. Lucia Limited Order. Statutory Instrument Number 90 of 2018, Tourism Stimulus and Investment, Spice Travel Limited Order.
Motions. Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to lay the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 39(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that the Minister of Finance may, by resolution of Parliament, borrow money from a bank or other financial institution for capital expenditure of government. And whereas it is further provided by Section 42(1) of the Finance Administration Act, Cap 1501, that there shall be charged and paid out of the consolidated fund debt charges for which the government is liable. And whereas the Minister of Finance considers it necessary to borrow from the Caribbean Development Bank an amount not exceeding US $4.9,927,210, consisting of a special funds resource portion of the amount of US $2,463,605 and an ordinary capital resource portion in the amount of US $2,463,605 for the purpose of financing the services of consultants to conduct implementing labs workshops and set up a performance management and delivery unit. And whereas in the case of the special funds resource portion, the loan is repayable in 40 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on the first due date after the expiration of 2 years following the date of the loan agreement, or on such later date as the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. And the interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum, withdrawn and outstanding on the amount of special funds resources portion. In the case of the ordinary capital resource portion, the loan is repayable in 40 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on the first due date after the expiration of 2 years following the date of the loan agreement, or on such later due date as the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. In the interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 4.8% per annum, withdrawn and outstanding on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion, and a commitment charge of the rate of 1% per annum is payable quarterly on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion, unwithdrawn and in which occurs from the 60th day following the date of the loan agreement. Be it resolved that Parliament authorizes the Minister of Finance to borrow from the Caribbean Development Bank an amount not exceeding $4,927,210, consisting of a special funds resources portion in the amount of US $2,463,605 and an ordinary capital resources portion in the amount of US $2,463,605 for the purpose of financing the services of consultants to conduct implementation labs workshops and to set up performance management and delivery unit. Be it further resolved, in the case of the special funds resources portion, the loan is repayable in 40 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on the first due date after the expiration of 2 years following the date of the loan agreement, or on such later date as the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. The interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum, withdrawn and outstanding on the amount of the special funds resources portion. In the case of the ordinary capital resources portion, the loan is repayable in 40 equal, approximately equal, and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date, the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on the first date after the expiration of 2 years following the date of the loan agreement, or on such later date, due date, as the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. The interest payable quarterly is a rate of 4.8% per annum, withdrawn on outstanding and the amount of ordinary capital resources portion, and a commitment charge of a rate of 1% per annum is payable quarterly on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion, unwithdrawn, and which occurs from the 60th day following the date of the loan agreement. Mr. Speaker, the implementation workshop labs and the establishment of the Performance Management Delivery Unit initiative is financed through the loans facilitated by the Caribbean Development Bank. In fact, the Caribbean Development Bank are the ones who approached the government of St. Lucia once they understood and had bought into the development policies that this government had adopted. And clearly we have been extremely focused on the ability to implement policies and programs. This project is not just about the implementation of capital projects, Mr. Speaker. This project is also about the implementation of policy and administration. So the Caribbean Development Bank approved the loan to the government of St. Lucia on the 25th of October 2018 in the amount of the $4,927,210 US. The loan, as we've explained, consists of $2,463,605 from the CDB's ordinary capital resources, OCR, and another $2,463,605 United States dollars from the CDB's special funds resource. So one of them is at an interest rate of 1%, and the other one is at an interest rate of 4.68%. The government of St. Lucia is developing a strategic development plan for 2019 to 2022. The SPDP will serve as the catalyst for transformation of socioeconomic conditions in St. Lucia with strong focus on inclusive, sustainable development. The new approach to developing the SPD will focus on implementation. So before I get into the specific areas, let me explain, Mr. Speaker, how this is going to work. So we currently have workshops about to take place in 6 sectors. And so all of the agencies that are involved in the work program and the implementation of those sectors will be involved in this discussion. And so we will have dedicated professionals from each one of those sectors participating to review the policy strategy that we have for those sectors and how we're going to measure performance, and then specifically dealing with how we're going to be able to implement those policies. So the 6 lab workshops currently over a 9-week period, Mr. Speaker, with senior public and private officials and technicians to map out detailed gender response plans. This process will involve, among other things, the selection of staff for the project management at the delivery unit of PMDU, and to prepare a report detailing the SBT, inclusive of implementation plans for the public scrutiny. So again, the intention is not just to keep this within the framework of government, but to make sure that civil society and the general public at large are very aware of what is the objectives that we have, how we're going to measure our own performance, and therefore the outcomes that we're hoping to be able to achieve through these plannings. The work of the government of St. Lucia is to establish a project management delivery unit in the Prime Minister's office. So after the workshops are taking place, part of the follow-up will be that there'll be a unit out of the Prime Minister's office, headed by the Prime Minister, that will now work with each of these sectors to make sure that the decisions that have been made are actually being implemented. And there will be continuous evaluation on their performance. So again, it is going to be very hands-on in terms of achieving our objectives. The proposed work plan with detailed activities and timelines and cost will all be documented. The establishment of an intensive training and change management program to strengthen the monitoring and coordination functions of the PMDU. You know, we're very, sometimes we make decisions, policy decisions, to do something, Mr. Speaker. And what happens is that the training and the resources to actually implement those decisions are not there. And then we sit back months or years later and ask ourselves, why didn't anything happen? And it seems that we, in hindsight, say, oh, well, this person wasn't trained to do that, or there was not enough resources. So the goal here is to actually establish what those are, where the weaknesses are, and to be able to be more proactive in our approach. The borrower shall repay the amount withdrawn from the SCR and OCR loan in 40 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments. So about a 10-year loan, Mr. Speaker. These payments are due, as we've indicated, on January 1st, April 1st, July 1st, and October 1st, after 2 years. So there'll be a 2-year grace period for this loan. And we've indicated what the interest rates are going to be. So I want to say that the 6 areas that we have earmarked, Mr. Speaker, for this program are 1, tourism, 2, agriculture, 3, infrastructure, 4, health, 5, education, and 6, social development, and I did not put them in order of priority. So the intention is to be able to have these workshops over the next 6 weeks in each one of these sectors, clearly identifying what the overarching policy is to be able to achieve, detailing a work program to achieve those targets, and how we're actually going to measure those targets, and being very clear our timelines for implementation. We've chosen these sectors to begin with because we believe that these are the areas that we can get the greatest amount of gains in proceeding. Once we have completed these work programs in the next 6 weeks, Mr. Speaker, they will now become an integral part of the government budget for moving forward. So when we came into government, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we had done was to challenge the ministries to say the likelihood of us being able to get additional resources, not impossible, but unlikely. So if you know what you know today, and you know that you're not going to get any more monies to be able to implement it, how would you restructure your agency in order to be able to achieve those 2 ends? And once we've done that, then now over the next 3 years is how do we transition into this new entity? So I'm very glad that the children from Sir Arthur Lewis are here, because clearly this is exactly what we've been asking Sir Arthur Lewis board to be able to do for the last 2 years. When we look at the finances of Sir Arthur Lewis, where we have salaries of almost $17.5 million, government is making a contribution of $15 million. So that means that each child, almost 2,000 of them, are actually getting a government subsidy of $7,500. And kids are being asked, students are being asked to contribute $1,500. The continual cry to get an increase in tuitions is under the understanding that government doesn't have any more money to put in other than the $15 million. And so the shortfall between salaries, because salaries are around $17.5 million, and the inability for Sir Arthur Lewis to actually maintain the buildings that they have. So for years, we've been going on the premises to who's supposed to fund it. And what's even more impossible, Mr. Speaker, is that these are historical buildings which require probably more than the usual amount of maintenance. And the children will know, the students will know, Mr. Speaker, that almost 80% of the buildings that we have at Sir Arthur are not habitable. In fact, when we had the recent storm or rains with Kirk, many of the students and the teachers were complaining about the amount of water that was coming through. So this is a great example of where this kind of workshop, Mr. Speaker, can go a long ways in meeting with the teachers, meeting with students, meeting with engineers, meeting with the Ministry of Education, in terms of saying, how are we going to resolve it? Because we cannot keep ignoring that the current conditions that we have are unsustainable, and that therefore something has to give. And we have to be able to make sure that the government of St. Lucia has a tertiary level facility that is actually delivering not only, more importantly, to the students, but also delivering to the state. Are we providing the necessary training in which kids and students now have a meaningful role to play in the development of the country? Are they prepared for the workforce? Are we preparing them in order to be able to get to a higher level of education? So it's again, stop running away from the issue, put all the critical people in the room, come with a very concrete plan, and then making sure as we go into the budget process that the necessary financial resources and human resources, Mr. Speaker, are being able to allocate it to solve the problem. So in education, in healthcare, in social development, we've been speaking about a more direct social program. This idea, Mr. Speaker, that we're going to continue to support the more vulnerable people in our society through tax concessions. The idea that by reducing the price of rice, flour, and sugar, somehow miraculously is going to be able to help all the vulnerable people, when in fact people who don't need the subsidy are actually benefiting. So maybe isn't it better now to refine that system, earn those extra revenues, and then cause those extra revenues that we're generating to go back into a direct social program, meaning that we're providing food, we're providing books, we're providing housing, we're providing attire for the more vulnerable in our society, and that we're able to put in a healthcare system that is able to facilitate them. So this government has recognized that we cannot continue down the path of ignoring the problems that we have. We've got to find practical solutions. And we're very encouraged by the participation of the civil servants and the professionals. I mean, today we've had almost 100% attendance at the first workshop. So I'm very encouraged by the level of enthusiasm that the government officials have embraced this idea. So, Mr. Speaker, with that being said, I'm looking forward to the support of my Parliament colleagues in giving the House and myself, my government, permission to proceed with the very generous loan that CDB has provided us. Thank you.
Honorable Leader, turn off. Honorable Leader, just turn off your light for the time being. Turn it off for the time being. I need to put a question first. Honorable members, the question is that Parliament authorizes the Minister for Finance to borrow from the Caribbean Development Bank an amount not exceeding US $4,927,210, consisting of a special funds resources portion in the amount of US $2,463,605 and an ordinary capital resources portion in the amount of US $2,463,605 for the purpose of financing the services of consultant to conduct implementation labs, workshops, and to set up a performance management and delivery unit. Be it further resolved that A, in the case of the special fund resources portions, 1, the loan is repayable in 40 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on the first due date after the expiration of 2 years following the date of the loan agreement, or on such later due date as the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. And 2, the interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 1% per annum withdrawn and outstanding on the amount of the special funds resources portion. B, in the case of the ordinary capital resources portion, 1, the loan is repayable in 40 equal or approximately equal and consecutive quarterly installments on each due date of the first day of January, the first day of April, the first day of July, and the first day of October of each year, commencing on the first due date after the expiration of 2 years following the date of the loan agreement, or on such later due date as the Caribbean Development Bank specifies in writing. 2, the interest is payable quarterly at a rate of 4.8% per annum withdrawn and outstanding on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion. And 3, a commitment charge at a rate of 1% per annum is payable quarterly on the amount of the ordinary capital resources portion unwithdrawn and which accrues from the 60th day following the date of the loan agreement. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have full confidence in the Caribbean Development Bank, in the professionals, in the management of the Caribbean Development Bank. But, but I am a bit perturbed at the amount of money we seem to be spending on consultancies. In the estimates of expenditure, I pointed out that the government was spending $14 million on consultancies, and at this time, we were not even aware that there were extra consultancies in terms of part payment for the Parker Company was about consultancies. Now we are going to be borrowing another $11 million for $13 million for consultancies. We understood that a foreign firm was also paid an undisclosed amount to deal with consultancies for the budget. What concerns me is that I know that we have a very competent civil service. A civil service, St. Lucia Civil Service, is possibly one of the most qualified civil services in the region. I know secretaries in the civil service with master's degrees. And I seem to be concerned. Why do we always have to seek foreign interference or foreign consultancies to be able to fulfill our mandate or our objectives for the people of St. Lucia? I believe that if we approach the system in a non-partisan manner, in a manner that does not target people that we imagine do not support us, do not support the government, and we allow these professionals to do their work, you give them the mandate and tell them this is what we want to achieve. I believe that St. Lucia has enough trained and qualified people who, if they are given the independence to advise on policy, to advise on change processes, to reach the objectives set even by this government, I think we'd have to spend a lot less money on consultancies. But it's because this government, in particular few ministers, have a desire and a zeal to attack people, to attack public servants, to attack professionals, to attack engineers, local engineers, when they make a pronouncement about St. Jude Hospital, to attack them, even to attack doctors, professionals again, who have the same skill to give the consultancies that we are paying money for. Doctors who have absolutely no interest in politics, but we attack them because they are offering advice and consultancies that we are going to pay for. I think that we would have saved that money that we are spending this morning. The Prime Minister's objectives may be laudable, but the point is, we could have avoided that expenditure if we had more confidence in our local professionals, if we were not as hasty as we are to attack the dissenting view. I think we would have saved that money. As the Prime Minister makes the point of rice, flour, and sugar, and again, I've heard that point before about there is no need to subsidize rice, flour, and sugar because other people benefit from that subsidy. That is a concept that has no bearing in economic theory. The consumption patterns, there is a concept called the giffen goods concept, where it says that as soon as people's quality of life improves and their income improves, they will no longer be consuming these products like rice, flour, and sugar, which we call giffen products, because they will move into another caliber of another quality of life, and they will no longer purchase these. So these goods do not obey the normal demand and supply curve. So to make the point, that you must not subsidize rice, flour, and sugar because poor people, because other people will benefit, is not, you know, it's, what it shows is the underpinnings from which the Prime Minister is coming from. The understanding, because people, rice, flour, and sugar, I'm sure there are many people in a particular income level who do not use white rice, no white flour, no brown sugar. I'm sure. Because it obeys the given goods concept. So I want the Prime Minister to desist from pretending that not subsidizing rice, flour, and sugar will not benefit the lower income people or the people who cannot afford to buy it. Secondly, the Prime Minister again goes into, and I wish he would not have done that, but he opened the door for a debate on SAAFA in the presence of the students of SAAFA. And he should not do that, because the state has a responsibility to educate the people of the country. It's a responsibility of the state, at least to a certain level of education. And to try to put a dollar value on the value of education, particularly for our young people who have reached that level, I don't think it is right. I think, again, the Prime Minister should desist from making these kind of statements. These people at Alpha Lewis, the students there, they are the future, and we speak about the youth and the future of the country. So we cannot put a price on the education and calculate how much money we are using to subsidize them. We have to subsidize them. It's our duty to subsidize the young people of this country. Most of us in this room, if governments did not subsidize us, at UWI, they pay economic costs. If governments didn't subsidize us, we would not have gone to university. So to put a dollar value on subsidizing education, I think the Prime Minister, I don't know if he means it, but I think he should not do it. Because it doesn't speak well to the psyche, to the students at SAAFA or the teachers at SAAFA. We understand that the SAAFA Lewis, the buildings are in need of repair. To my mind, we ought to sit down and work on a method and look at our priorities, because this morning I'm not going into priorities, what we use our money for. That is for another show. But we could look at our priorities and see if in certain places where we spent money, it would not have been better used for the students of St. Lucia, for the young people of St. Lucia to educate them, if we had put our money in different areas. So finally, I want to make the point that I'm very concerned about the money that we seem to be spending on consultancies, where I believe that there are local professionals, local St. Lucians, local doctors, local engineers, local educators, who, if given the scope, the independence to do a job, would do it just as well as these foreign consultants. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Castries South East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd ask leave of you, Mr. Speaker, to take this opportunity to wish my Prime Minister a very happy birthday, God's richest blessings, and continued strong leadership in this country. I also want to acknowledge the students from SAAFA who would be viewing and seeing firsthand the debate in the proceedings of the House. So welcome to all of you. Mr. Speaker, going to the subject at hand, the involvement of CDB, and I noted that the member for Castries East attempted to qualify his confidence in CDB but in the same paragraph to question what the attempt is to do with this program. Now, I will attempt to give a little more background to what it is. We came into government in 2016. All countries in its development stage would have a short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategy in terms of where we need to be, how this economy is going to grow, how we are going to position the country in order to accomplish what the end results we are looking for. We have some very good public servants. I don't question that. I don't question that we have good public servants. But I don't question the fact that we have some public servants who do not live up to the expectations. But you see, conveniently, we pacify certain statements in this House because one day when it is good, the public servants are not good, and one day when the situation is convenient, you have the same people saying something different. But we need to understand, when we came in, what was the midterm strategy that we inherited? Because here was a situation where the government had just passed a budget in April, called elections in June. Did we inherit a midterm strategy? Did we inherit a short-term strategy as to where to position this country? Because what we have been saying, Mr. Speaker, as a government, is that 3% growth will not cut it for St. Lucia. To remain on a sustainable path, you cannot grow the economy by 3% and balance the budget at the end of the day, because the demands are much higher than the earnings. So whenever you have to spend more than you are earning, you are going to incur debt. So the idea of the midterm strategy is to be able to put the country on the right path. And I will break that down in simpler terms so that everybody can appreciate what is being said here. Let me use some examples, glaring examples. After Hurricane Thomas in 2010, the government negotiated financing from the World Bank for implementation of projects. It is 2018, and some of these projects are yet to be implemented. We know there's a lot of bureaucracy with the World Bank. We know there's a lot of bureaucracy with the systems. But when it can be pinpointed that some of the delays are a result of the shortcomings of the borrowing member country, then it is a cause for concern. So the intention of this loan, Mr. Speaker, is to help to put systems in place that you'll have results-oriented focus. Because as we go through, one of the challenges that we have is ministries operate individually. So let me use a very practical example. As the minister responsible for economic development, the projects come through my ministry. So let's say we're doing a project in the Ministry of Health. But it must go through the Ministry of Health for ratification to get the persons to sign off. Then it has to come back to the ministry. If it's an infrastructural project, then from health, it goes to infrastructure. From infrastructure, it then comes back again. So by the time you go through the system, Many years ago, in the government, there was that unit within the Prime Minister's office, under that banner, that helped in the implementation of projects. So what we are finding is that a lot of our projects are delayed because the synergies that are required are not there. Ministries are operating in silos a lot of times. And we want to come to the house and pretend that everything is nice and proper. We are dropping in the ratings, not because our position is lower, so let's take the ease of doing business, but it's because of what other countries are doing to advance themselves. So even when we may be in a position where we have done certain things, other countries may be doing more than us in the process. So coming back to these labs and these workshops, and I am tempted to respond to the member for Castries East on consultancies. But I'd rather come to that at another point in time, Mr. Speaker. Because the debate or the bill before us is too important to narrow it down to an issue of consultancy. Because I can call figures for consultancies that would raise serious concerns. Now, going back to the issue of CDB. When we engaged CDB, when we came in, there was $110 million US of loans that had been committed to the previous government. The method of implementation and the speed of implementation, the ability to even draw down on these loans and to be able to deliver was not there. And the evidence is there to show that the previous government had put in a levy for the desilting of the dam and had collected money for 5 years and could not start the work. Didn't they have the consultancies that they are talking about? Didn't they have all of the resources that they are talking about? Why couldn't it be done? The projects on the World Bank, why couldn't it have been implemented? The same people who are criticizing us today about foreign consultancies, we need to go back and find out what happened with the airport and why the airport project was not implemented. We don't criticize just to gain political points. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we are at a critical stage as a country, and our level of implementation is not up to what we require to put this country on the right path. And that's a fact, Mr. Speaker. We've been speaking about the single window for, let's say, permits to build houses. That discussion took place when I was in government between 2006 and 2011. It continued between 2011 to 2016 when I was in opposition. And we are 2.5 years almost into government. Is that single window available? So let me give you an example of what we are faced with. Somebody wants to build a house. You have to get a health permit. You have to get a traffic permit depending on, or approval depending on where on the road your location is. You have to get the fire, you have to get the electrical. Sometimes when you get the health, the time it takes you to get fire approval, the health has expired. You have to start the process again. And people come to us as ministers every day, highlighting the inefficiencies in the systems. What we have done as a government in April of this year, based on discussions with CDB, because Caribbean Development Bank is positioned to help in the growth and development of this region. They interact with all governments in the region, and they are able to highlight the areas of deficiencies and weaknesses. So St. Lucia was chosen as the first country to implement this project. And if people, you would not see the benefits of everything today, but all countries that have adopted this method have seen results that far outweigh the expenditure. Because it's easy to focus on, oh, it's costing you this. What is the cost of not putting this country on a sustainable path? What is the cost of not attending to the matters that needs to be addressed so that we can become much more efficient and productive? Everybody knows that, and I know the track record of the Labour Party, you know, Mr. Speaker. You know what they said to me about St. Jude's? We worked every day, but they couldn't finish it. So it's not the question of how much you are working. It is the end result of your work. That's right. So this seminar and these workshops that are being conducted, it's being conducted in result areas. What we are focusing on is key result areas. And what we did, Mr. Speaker, we identified 6 key sectors that would play an integral role in positioning St. Lucia. Because we are about to celebrate 40 years. We're not a child anymore as a country. We have become an adult as a country. And we have to learn to handle our business in more efficient and productive ways. So what is happening now? What we are seeing is the 6 key areas, the key result areas. Healthcare. Crime, which comes under the broader heading that PM used of social development. Because there is a direct linkage between how you develop socially and the impact of crime, or whether you're going to reduce it or increase it. So on the social side, that is very important. Then we have the area of education. And as we have indicated, both from the World Bank and the IMF, healthcare and education is no longer considered just a social good, but it can also fall under the heading of economic or financial. Because if you're not healthy, you cannot be a productive citizen as you ought to be. And if you are not properly equipped for the jobs, then the jobs have to go elsewhere, and it affects. So there's a direct correlation. So as a government, we chose 3 in the social area and 3 of them in the economic area, but 2 in the social can also fall under the economic. Why are we doing this as a country, Mr. Speaker? Over the years, we go through the routine of running government. The forward planning, the long-term goals and objectives. How are we going to create sufficient jobs for our school graduates? How is the education system preparing our young people for the jobs of the market? The former Prime Minister and member for Beaufort South at some point in time indicated that most of the workforce, in excess of 70% of the workforce, was not properly equipped for the jobs that are available. So when we say our focus on education is critical, because you have to match the demands of the market. How do we come about with the priority list of government? As a minister, You have 6 friends who want to go and study a particular field of study. You can go in there and use your influence in cabinet, and you can say, let's make this part of the priority list. There is no clear direction. What we have done, and this is not being done by ministers of government. So that's why I'm a bit taken aback by what the member for Castries is and leader of the opposition is saying. This is not a seminar being conducted by the ministers of government. We played our role in the process in that we were engaged like every other sector. We have the private sector. We have the trade unions. We have the Chamber of Commerce. We have the public servants. We have WASCO, Lucia. You name the entities. All of them are involved in the process of coming up with what are the best strategies to use to grow these 6 sectors. And I did not complete but the rest is infrastructure, tourism, and agriculture. What is the demand of the infrastructure if you are going to grow this economy? What is it that we need to grow this economy sufficiently so that we can be sustainable? And we've said it. Other persons have said it. Maybe when I say it, they tell me what you say doesn't have any value. But we know that St. Lucia cannot survive the way that it is today. Mr. Speaker, if you do not plan well, you will fail. And there are countless examples of poor planning by the previous administration and a number of failed projects under their watch. So, the idea of this is to help put processes, the focus groups, Mr. Speaker, which started at the Royalton Hotel today and includes all the cross sectors of the various entities that I have highlighted. The focus is going to come out with what are the key areas, what is it we need to do to make ourselves more efficient, to deliver projects on a more timely basis. Because it is not what you do, it is what is the cost of what you are doing that matters at the end of the day. And like I said, I will choose not to respond to everything that was said by the leader of the opposition, but to highlight, Mr. Speaker, that if we had, when we came into government, there was a medium-term strategy that we could have adopted. I asked for it. I became the Minister for Economic Development. I asked, give me the midterm plan for the country. There was nothing to give. Because there was no midterm strategic plan as to where St. Lucia should be. These labs and this seminar is going to help implement and develop the medium-term development strategy for the period 2019 to 2022. And note I said 2022, Mr. Speaker, because elections is due in 2021. We are not planning for an election cycle. We are planning, along with the Caribbean Development Bank, what St. Lucia needs to be doing to position us as a sustainable developing country. That is what the focus is. And for members to try and say, well, why are you spending this money? Is that why St. Jude's was being built without a plan? Was the plan costing too much? You see, I have to ask myself these questions. Because if the plan, yet still as a country, if you go in and build a little 2x4 plywood house somewhere, they tell you you have to have a plan. But there was a government operating.
The racetrack has a plan?
And after 15 years in government, then they put a vision commission to tell them what to do. Mr. Speaker, that is doing things back to front. How can you be in government and after 15 years is when you're looking for the vision plan that you want to implement? Before you come into government, you must have a vision where you want to take this country. And as a party in government, we made our vision plan very clear. Affordable, quality health care, world-class education, security. You know, Mr. Speaker, when you look at where we are, we didn't inherit a plan. We didn't inherit anything that the other government was doing that was sustainable in moving forward. So you have to go back to the drawing board. And you have to do things over. And what we are saying is that let us put this country on a sustainable path. This is not, but you all appointed a vision commission just before the last election. You forget that? We didn't even have time to get a report from the vision commission. I mean, Mr. Speaker, the basics. If you cannot get the basics right, you cannot get anything else right. And I've said it. The good book, Mr. Speaker, says, if a man is going to build a house, the first thing he does is he sits down and he contemplates. Yes. He contemplates. And he counts the cost. And he determines, can I do what I'm going to do? Because if I cannot, it will become a monument of shame. The previous government kept on doing things and we were just going around in circles. Mr. Speaker, I sat down where they were there, you know, and I tried to advise them that, look here, there must be a clear strategy. What is it that you want to accomplish? Budget after budget. No clear plan. When this government was elected, we said, give us 3 years and we will turn around this economy. Mr. Speaker, it's 2.5 years. And go and check the growth rate in this country. The performance of the economy has been better under this government than any period of time under the previous government.
That's right. That's right. Taking credit for Labour. That's right.
So, Mr. Speaker, the labs that is taking place here in St. Lucia today, the bulk of the expenditure is being done in St. Lucia. The workshops that are being conducted, the people who are being educated, the people who are being we are not the implementers of the plan. We still have to go back to the public servants. We have to go back to the private sector. These are the people who are going to drive the process of development. All we are doing is facilitating. Too many times we think we are the bosses. And you know what? When you don't get buy-in from the public servants, they can stall any program they want because they know how to maneuver around the system. So what I'm saying is that when you involve everybody and you get buy-in from all persons, what you are doing is you are helping the people of St. Lucia to understand the importance of having results-oriented projects. Mr. Speaker, we start things and they don't finish. We build temporary things and they become permanent. We start at one price and it ends up doubling the price. There are countless examples of that in St. Lucia, you know. But at the end of the day, if as a country, we would not stop for a moment and take stock and say the way we've been doing it in the past is not giving us the desired results. And that is what this seminar is about. And I am sure that every member on the government side who attended the first sessions can testify that it is one with a clear plan, We were able to identify our areas of focus, and it is our intention. Would we be able to deliver on all 6 of them within the next 2.5 years? I cannot guarantee you that. But what I know is that we are setting a foundation on which to build, a foundation on which St. Lucia can become much more sustainable. That is where we want to go. So it's not about spending some money on consultancies, and I could show them the wastage. And maybe one of these days, Mr. Speaker, I'll come and make a minister's statement and show you all consultancies that have been issued in this country. I know those that started at 7 million and ended up at 20 million under their watch. Because you see, they will give you small figures to begin with, but it's always more than what they give you. How much was the increase? So at the end of the day, what we need to look at, Mr. Speaker, is that this government gave a manifesto that we were going to deliver. Quality healthcare, I know, is something they're afraid of. The opposition does not want us to be able to deliver on this. Don't mind all the talk, Mr. Speaker. They don't want us to deliver on quality healthcare because it's going to expose them too much. But I want to assure the people of St. Lucia, through you, Mr. Speaker, that these labs, and if the member for Castries East has the confidence that he says he has in CDB, why would he question that CDB would not have done a proper investigation before granting a loan like that to St. Lucia? So you think the people in CDB, so when they approve your 110 million when you were in government, didn't they do the proper assessments? So you felt that when you were there, it could have been approved, but when this government is there, so CDB should not give us a loan. Mr. Speaker, this is an initiative which started with CDB and is supported by the government of St. Lucia. That is the difference. And I know the member for Castries East knows better than what he said there. But Mr. Speaker, that's what he chose to say. So at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I give my full support to this motion. And I know that by the end of these 6 weeks, that of the training, seminars, and the workshops, that we are going to be on the path to be able to develop a sustainable St. Lucia by the year 2022. I thank you.
Member for Castries South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I noted you had wished the Prime Minister a happy birthday, and I think his colleague also did the same. So in true parliamentary spirit, I also want to wish him happy birthday. I tried to figure out his age, Mr. Speaker, and maybe you can help me, because I saw a clip recently where he said he went to the comprehensive school, soon to be demolished, 34 years ago. And if he went to comprehensive school 34 years ago, I assume he's around 44, 45. So I'm not sure, but regardless, a member from Mico North, happy birthday to you. Mr. Speaker, I also have a laugh, have a good laugh. Mr. Speaker, I also noted that you congratulated comprehensive. I wasn't the one, Mr. Speaker, who said that the school is likely to be demolished. It was said in New York. It has been carried. St. Lucians are debating it.
This
Mr.
is not
Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, you also congratulated the West Indies cricket team, the women. But I also want to congratulate St. Lucians for coming out and giving such tremendous support to the team. I'd also want you to note, Mr. Speaker, and in speaking to some former colleagues from the ICC, they reiterated the fact that the Bosejo cricket ground, the Darwin Summit cricket ground, is one of the best designed in the world. Small, intimate, one of the best designed. It was designed by St. Lucians. who also designed Providence Cricket Ground in Guyana and the St. Kitts Cricket Ground. And it says a lot about the competencies we have in St. Lucia to design sporting facilities. But that's another story for another day, Mr. Speaker.
Don't make it today, man.
Mr. Speaker might stop me and tell me to stick with the bill. Mr. Speaker, I listened to the member from Castries South East, and he reminded me of a very famous children's story, Alice in Wonderland, where Alice said she did not want to go among the mad people. And then the cat said, but we all mad in here. How could you not want to be among the mad people? And the member from Castries South East is a sack of contradictions, a bag of contradictions. And I want to focus on this bill and to take you through a few points. The motion. The member stood up and he said, the Labour Party came into power and they had no vision. How could you come to government and you have no vision? And you wanted to have a vision commission. But in the same breath, he says, basically, we do not know what to do to build a sustainable developing society by 2022. So we hire in, spending $13 million for somebody to tell us or to assist us to get to know what we have to do. But it's the same person who said, how can you come into government and not know what it is you have to do? But if you knew what you had to do, why are you having this? Why are you having it? Because you boasted, you knew what had to be done. But now you're going to spend $13 million for you to be assisted. Mr. Speaker, it took the government 2.5 years to realize they did not really know what they were about. 2.5 years. 2.5 years to now realize they did not know what they were about. And they now need workshops to tell them what has to be done for the next 3 years. But the member from Castries South East let the cat out of the bag. Hear what he said. We are dropping in the ratings. We are dropping in the ratings. So of course there's a need for this. He also said, things are not nice and proper. So yes, there is a need for this loan. He also said, Mr. Speaker, projects are being delayed. So yes, there is a need for this loan. But all of us in here would recall, execute, execute, execute. You remember this? Yes. Mr. Speaker? We are the masters in execution. We don't need no advice from you all on the other side. 2.5 years later, there is no execution.
No, man, there is.
There is no execution. We need CDB to come and have labs with us, have workshops with us, to the tune of $13 million so we can learn how to execute now. Is the Soufriere Square executed? Is Radio St. Lucia executed? And Mr. Speaker, when we started this morning, I noticed the mics were not working. You can imagine what came into my mind? Whether or not next month is the last month for this building, because we were told Parliament building, the courthouse, and the printer will be broken down by the end of the year. So I was wondering whether that was already a sign of the breaking down of the building. Execution again, Mr. Speaker. Execution. So if the honorable member, and he said he is the Minister of Economic Development because he's the master executor, and he comes there today to tell us, we don't know what we have to do for the next 3 years, so we're borrowing $13 million. So we can have workshops, and we can now decide what is needed to achieve a sustainable developing society. The exact words of the member from Castries South East. Now I'm left to wonder, you spend more time in government than you have left, and you're only now trying to decide what it is that you have to do. Mr. Speaker, in the budget this year, it was announced that there will be 2 new units in the Ministry of Finance. That's March this year. March this year. And let me call out to you the 2 units. The National Integrated Planning and Program Unit, $840,000 would be spent on setting it up. And the National Competitiveness and Productivity Unit, $1.3 million to set it up. We were told then that those units will do exactly what this new unit will be doing. Now, explain that to me. And these are masters of execution, huh? Mr. Speaker, explain that to me. In March this year in this House, 2 new units in the Ministry of Finance. To achieve all the things we are now being told today, we're taking a loan of $13 million to do. Did we not know that in March when this was presented in the budget? And you are masters of execution? It makes me wonder. And I'm not going into, and I must tell you, Mr. Speaker, I try to understand exactly what the $13 million will be spent for. Would the $13 million be spent for consultancy fees, hosting workshops? Is it to pay salaries? Is it to pay technical people? I have no idea. None, Mr. Speaker. But let's put that aside, because the government, if it has now discovered that it really had no idea where it's going, and now needs to find out where it should go, they're going to take a loan of $14 million to find out. But what's even more worrying, Mr. Speaker, and before I go on to it, Mr. Speaker, I want to say something on education. And I need you to say to the member for Mico South that it really hurts our hearts as St. Lucians when he speaks of education in the manner in which he does. Mr. Speaker, you and I know each other from a previous life when we fought for youth and student rights in this country.
Serious?
Yes, he was a noted radical in his youth days. What? Mr. Speaker, you'd recall we were part of a campaign called that education is a right and not a privilege. Amen. Education is a right and not a privilege. Every single St. Lucian has a right to education and to achieve the highest level of education. Governments do not subsidize our youth to give them education. Government invests in our youth when they give them education. I cannot accept anybody saying to young people, this is a favor we're giving you, we're subsidizing your education for you. When a country spends money on educating the young, that's an investment for the future. And $15 million is not enough for Sir Arthur Lewis Community College. It's not enough. We should be spending more on our young people to give them the necessary education that they need. And I'm not saying Sir Arthur Lewis is perfect and they're producing the best students. I'm not saying that. But the ideological mindset must be one. No, there are challenges in the education system. Let's not deny that. But the ideological mindset has to be to fix those mistakes and to treat young people as the generations that will carry this country, and we need to provide them with the skills and competencies to do so. And when we spend money to do so, we're not subsidizing them, we're investing in them. And I think that's an important distinction that we have to make. But let's come back to the bill, Mr. Speaker. Let's come back to the bill. So this government is now going to spend $14 million to develop a plan to tell them what to do in the next 3 years. But let's look at borrowing, Mr. Speaker. And I really want St. Lucians, students, and members of this House to reflect on it. You do not yet know what you're going to do. You do not yet know what you're going to do. But listen to this story. Based on the budget, the estimates, this government borrowed $196.6 million in 2016. 196.6. In 2017, it borrowed $241.2 million. And based on estimates for this financial year, which ends in March, it will borrow $300 million. A total of $738 million since 2016. $738 million since 2016. But it gets worse, Mr. Speaker. It was announced last year, well, at the budget, the last budget, but not reflected in the figures, that the Prime Minister was able to get the Taiwanese to agree to lend St. Lucia $150 million US. 100 million US would be going to the airport, and 50 million US, I think, for schools and for roads. That's not reflected in the 738 million that I spoke about. We later learned that was not enough money for the airport. So a local consortium of banks would be asked to put together a loan of 75 million US dollars. All in this year. All in this year. And then the honorable member from Castle South East said in an interview with Rick Wayne, our prime minister is such a skillful negotiator, he got the Taiwanese to top up the 150 million US, and we'll now get 200 million US in loans from the Taiwanese. So think about that. 200 million US is 540 million EC. Now those figures are not yet included in the 738 million I spoke about. So Mr. Speaker, if you add the 200 million US from the Taiwanese, you add the 75 million US from local consortium of banks, do you know how much money we'll be borrowing for this year alone if this government gets its way? 1 billion EC dollars. This year alone, they will borrow 3 million according to the estimates, and from the Taiwanese and the local consortium of banks, we will be borrowing $1 billion for this year alone. And if you add what is borrowed in 2017 and 2016, this government would have borrowed, if they get their way, $1.5 billion. Think about it, Mr. Speaker. St. Lucians, think about it. $1.5 billion since 2016 for a government that now says after 2.5 years, we do not know what's required, so we're going to bring in experts to tell us what to do for the next 3 years. You announcing you're building a new airport. You're building a new wing at St. Jude's. You're investing in roads. You're investing in schools. You're borrowing 275 million US dollars. That's not even in the estimates yet. And you're still admitting that you do not know what's required for a sustainable developing society. And you're already borrowing this year alone $1 billion. Mr. Speaker, explain the logic of that to me. Wouldn't it be more sensible to wait for the outcome of all of that, deliberations and workshops, and then decide to go and borrow? Wouldn't that make more sense? Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I'm missing something. Well, I must tell you, you both said, the honorable member both said that they were masters of execution and they didn't get advice from anyone. And 2.5 years later, he is saying that things are not fit and proper and our ratings are falling. But he also said that they had 3% growth. Mr. Speaker, when you borrow $1 billion in a year, you're supposed to be topping up 10% growth or close to that. If you're borrowing, no government in the history of this country has borrowed $1 billion in a year or even in 5 years. This government is going to do it in 1 year, $1 billion. So you're borrowing, and the honorable member from Castries office said it, you have to borrow money to finance growth. He's admitting that this government is achieving growth through huge borrowings. But you know who has to repay those loans? The next generation that has to repay those loans. And I'm reflecting, Mr. Speaker, if all what the honorable member said is the reason why these workshops are being held, and that the government wants to know now what it has to do to achieve a developing society, why have we borrowed so heavily? Why? So, Mr. Speaker, this may be necessary, the view of the government, but in Alice in Wonderland, this is as mad as the Hatter. It's contradictory, incongruent.
Who's the Hatter?
Oh, honorable member from Beaufort South, the Hatter wears the tallest hat. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm totally lost as to where this government is taking our country. And I think very soon we'll have an exhaustive debate in this House where we shall examine the case against this government. Thank you very much.
Honorable member for Lambeth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, generally we would come to this House and just a routine thing of borrowing to meet our fiscal deficit. But there is a time and place to borrow to finance a fiscal deficit, Mr. Speaker. To probably borrow to invest in productive activities with some future returns. But everything is sensitive to context today, Mr. Speaker, because we are not in a normal setting where a government is operating normally. The member for Kasri Southeast has criticized the opposition in his response to supporting his government's motion. You do not need to be a seminal figure in economics or finance to know, Mr. Speaker, that the member for Kasri Southeast is completely lost when it comes to responding to issues dealing with the opposition and its management of the economy of this country. Mr. Speaker, what did he criticize? He criticized the Labour Party for pursuing some general principles that have allowed smaller economies to engage successfully with globalization and maintain fiscal sanity. Pursue, in the context of a fiscal deficit we inherited when we entered office in 2011, we pursued a calibrated policy response that addressed the real policy challenges in a way that preserved fiscal stability. Consequently, we treated St. Lucia with a combination of fiscal consolidation, active debt management, a lowering of domestic vulnerabilities to external shocks, and the implementation of a growth-enhancing reform strategy. This is the way responsible governments and competent politicians go about the business of administering the necessary medication to return our country to fiscal sanity. In comes the United Workers' Party administration in 2016, Mr. Speaker, promising the people of this country all sorts of things, jobs, lowering the tax burden on the people of St. Lucia. They promise all sorts of things, Mr. Speaker, that they're only going to borrow to have a balanced budget very quickly. They are not going to have any fiscal deficits. But what did they do, Mr. Speaker? They even had an orange march accusing the government at the time of having a hidden $6.80. Yes, which the Prime Minister promised in this sitting of the House to actually show us where that $6.80 was hidden. They had an orange march, Mr. Speaker. When they got into office, they put another $1.50 on the $6.80 that they claimed that we had hidden in the fuel taxes. So essentially, Mr. Speaker, they promised to reduce license fees by 50%, which they did not. 100%. Half. They said they want to slash it down. Half of the increase. Half. No, you didn't say half of the increase. You said half. By 50%. It was not anything to do with increase. But you know what? Came in, decided to do some surgery on VAT because they said they're going to lower VAT and eventually eliminate the VAT and then slash the license fees by 50%. What did they do, Mr. Speaker? If there was a hidden tax of $6.80 and we were being oppressive when they came into office, they had to reduce it, Mr. Speaker. Why did they increase it by an additional $1.50? And they said they moved to $4. So which means if you add $1.50 on $6.80, you can never get $4. So today I want them, so he went to dive for it in that particular mechanism, and I'm hoping that he would make it available today. But the point is, Mr. Speaker, he has made things worse for the people of the country. When he imposed that $1.50 on each gallon of gas, The people of this country are paying much more, Mr. Speaker, for goods and services. Can you imagine in Castries, somebody who sells goods to Bouton, Soufre, Labrie, Vieux-Fort, for every gallon of gas, there's an additional 150. They will pass on that cost to the consuming public. So we saw no reduction in the prices of goods and services in the economy, but we saw a general increase. A general increase. That in itself, Mr. Speaker, is bad news. I do not see any type of fiscal discipline being demonstrated by the current administration. What they have been doing from the time they got into office, Mr. Speaker, is to destroy everything good that they found. They found thousands of people employed, they got rid of them. And the only thing that they're utilizing the resources of the country to do is not for health care and for airport redevelopment. Only recently, the government sent out a press release, the Department of Infrastructure, Ports and Energy, indicating that they're building a new road to accommodate the Hiwanora International Airport reconstruction project. Mr. Speaker, this is completely untrue. This is completely untrue. The airport is south of the Laurentius Road. If there was development of that area, you did not need to close the Laurentius Road. In fact, what they are doing is opposed to the proper development of the Hiwanora International Airport. They're actually building on a road that was in an area that was supposed to have been reserved for the terminal to have been properly situated, Mr. Speaker, and for the necessary security clearances to be in place. But they have diverted the road, spent millions of dollars on a new road that was highly unnecessary, moving utilities, and coming here and behaving as if it's just normal borrowing to do something good. There was no need for that $12 million to build a road encroaching on airport property. The Laurentius Road just needed repaving. It's wide enough. You probably could enhance it with some drainage works. But there was nothing wrong, Mr. Speaker, to accommodate a racetrack, which, of course, will bring absolutely nothing in terms of future benefits to the people of this country. By the Prime Minister's own admission that the track would be a loss-making enterprise. And so we have spent millions of dollars just to subsidize the Prime Minister's reckless desires of having a racetrack. And everything is subordinated to the building of that racetrack. The Prime Minister found and he opened the door about health care. Mr. Speaker, we should be borrowing.
Remember, just a reminder of the motion.
Of course, we are borrowing, Mr. Speaker. I am just saying that we could have avoided borrowing today if we did not waste all those monies on some racetrack. That's what I'm saying, Mr. Speaker. We could have avoided the borrowing. I'm hearing some $12 million to some Lockerbie individual for something that is like the emperor's new clothes. Had we, Mr. Speaker, avoided that cost, we would not come here to borrow any money for that purpose, however good they claim it is, Mr. Speaker. Those things that we are doing and sometimes we come here to borrow for are actually within the sphere of competence of our public servants, as the leader of the opposition said. So we engage in wasting the country's money, and then we come here and say, let's borrow for something good, and the opposition must agree because it is something good. But we must look at the borrowing in the overall context of what we are doing. When the government came in 2011, we had taken a loan from the Taiwanese for the reconstruction of the St. Joe's Hospital. We borrowed. The hospital was almost completed, Mr. Speaker. And then they found all sorts of things. They are masquerading all over the place, indicating that it is not appropriate. It was a hospital, you know. That was St. Joe's Hospital. And if it was not burnt in 2009, the hospital would have been operating. Now, it's improved. It's improved. They found money to build St. Jude's, but no, just for petty politics. They said they're going to build some cage at St. Jude's now because the hospital is not good. Mr. Speaker, I am from the southern part of the island. And you know every time I come to this house, the issue of healthcare and St. Jude's is of paramount importance. How can you deprive the people of the south of the hospital? We have a CT scan in one of the rooms that the people of the south could benefit from. But people have to go all the way to Tapia to pay over $1,000 for a scan. Persons who cannot afford to even have breakfast in a day. Just because this government believes that they have dominion over life and death. Just because they figure out they can do whatever they want. But I have made it clear in this house, Mr. Speaker, I have read the mood of the people of the South. If the Prime Minister believes that he's going to build some cage or some pig pen and put people in it, I am telling the Prime Minister, he better think again. Because the people of the southern part of the island are determined to resist occupation of their hospital by any other entity. By any other entity. So, Mr. Speaker, the other point is, when we are going to finance expenditure, we have what is called the overall account. So we have the overall balance, where included in the overall balance is grants from overseas. In the construction of the hospital, millions of dollars were given to us by friendly governments to pump into something that is of paramount importance for the economic development of this country. And the Prime Minister and his government decides to just throw over $40 million away and comes here and pretend that it's legitimate borrowing they are coming to do. We are in a very difficult environment where countries are not as generous as before, Mr. Speaker. And if we are going to jeopardize our chances of attracting official development assistance, then the borrowing will get worse. And when the borrowing gets worse, Mr. Speaker, what happens? Interest costs will grow rapidly and narrows room for fiscal maneuver. Key investments in the future are at risk. Rising debt means lower incomes, less flexibility to respond to crises. We are in a hurricane belt. Already we are struggling to meet our obligations. We have a fiscal deficit, and the government is widening that fiscal deficit like there's no tomorrow. It limits our ability to respond to a hurricane. If we have a major hurricane in this country, apart from doing our usual business, we have to respond to it. How do we respond when the government insists on borrowing for all the wrong reasons, Mr. Speaker? Protecting the essential safety net. We have the vulnerable in our midst, and I think the member for Grozile should be able to appreciate that. When you grow debt, it doesn't give you the room to take care of the most vulnerable in our society. A solid fiscal foundation leads to economic growth. Mr. Speaker, the situation is further compounded by the government moving away from the arrangement with the World Bank for the financing of the airport. Move away from it for no good reason. So over $400 million now, we will have to take in debt. We'll have to borrow. Before, with the over $400 million, the World Bank would have taken care of the airport redevelopment. They would have managed it for a certain amount of years. And we would have the space, by not borrowing that $400 million, to actually address ourselves to the pressing but legitimate needs of this country, like education. And I'm happy that the Sir Louis students are here. Like Sir Louis, we could now pump. Jamaica did it only recently. We could now invest in education. And other times, you know, we watch teachers and students, and we believe that we spend a lot of money on education, and education do not bring in any monies into government coffers. But if you want to know about economic chaos, it's close schools and send teachers home. Education, Mr. Speaker, it caused the workforce to be more efficient so that they can produce at a cheaper rate, so goods and services will be lower, and that would feed economic growth. Education has its own benefit, and it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that we understand those things when we decide to manage an economy. So what are we doing here today, Mr. Speaker? We are just growing debt and growing debt and growing debt in a manner that's not organized, in a manner that is not going to really invest in the productive sectors of the economy. That racetrack is a problem, a burden for the people of this country. And I will conclude, Mr. Speaker, by suggesting to the government that they attempt to pursue a better course of action where managing the fiscal problem of the country is concerned. Because we are going to find ourselves into a problem tomorrow. Because we have not even gotten to that 200 million US dollars that they're talking about. And already our debt to GDP ratio is already so high. So in fact, Mr. Speaker, in fact, Mr. Speaker, I do not fall easy prey to provocation. I will maintain a disciplined course. And I will conclude my presentation this morning by saying to you this afternoon, yes, of course it's empty because revelation comes to the prepared mind. Revelation comes to the prepared mind. And if the mind is prepared, they cannot receive that warning and that message. When you try to come here and try to heckle me, you do not know what you're doing, honorable member. I think you should supposed to learn. Just sit and learn.
Honorable members.
So, Mr. Speaker, that is what you get when, you know, persons who are not interested in representing people are here. Just creating noise and just messing around, masquerading here as if it is a playground. This place is not a playground. This is serious business. We are talking about the lives of people who are affected because St. Jude's Hospital is not completed. We are talking about our schools that are in a bad condition. We are talking about the legitimate and pressing needs of the people of this country that have been ignored by his government. And he's laughing. Continue to laugh. But the just God who presides over the destinies of nations will deal with you. No matter what you plan and plot, God has a way of undoing it. So, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for allowing me to make my brief intervention, and you shall be hearing from me if necessary as we navigate the agenda for the day. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable member for Vifort South.
Speaker, I think there are times in my living memory I appreciate the fact that I've been in this house since 1997 and now approaching 21 years. I say this, Mr. Speaker, because inevitably there are so many memories, and from time to time one has to turn to the living experiences in this house to explain current behavior, current policy, and even to share with members particular experiences over time. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, it is a delight to hear honorable members even on the opposing side. Because there are moments when they are tempted to say things that compels you to search in the passage of time to be able to respond to.
It's no secret that I particularly enjoy the member for Castries Southeast. I really do. And last sitting of the House, Mr. Speaker, you may recall that after he spoke, I quipped that the honorable member is born again because he made certain disclosures, certain statements that were so different from previous positions that he had taken that for all practical purposes, I think we are dealing with a member who had adopted a new policy, a new approach, that he had renounced the past. Of course, I did not believe that it was a change of faith because I know the honorable member is anchored to his faith, Mr. Speaker. I merely meant, Mr. Speaker, that the honorable member had declared changes in policy approach, and so it is with this CDB loan. I have sat in this honorable house and heard the honorable member criticize viscerally, fiercely, without any remorse, the Caribbean Development Bank. And frankly, there are occasions when I have agreed with him that basically the Caribbean Development Bank is doing a disservice to this island and to the region. Mr. Speaker, I say unashamedly that I do not support the current management of the Caribbean Development Bank. I don't. I've hinted that before in this Parliament. Why? Because I do not believe that the current management of the Caribbean Development Bank are living to what the founding fathers of the bank, and in particular our own Sir Arthur Lewis, pronounced for that bank. The Caribbean Development Bank has departed from that. And the Caribbean Development Bank has lost sight that the reason for its existence is to facilitate the economic development of small islands. That is in the founding document. That is what Sir Arthur preached. And that is what Sir Arthur, when he was president of the bank, attempted to do. The bank has long departed, Mr. Speaker, from that founding principle. Now, what does this have to do with this loan here? This loan to finance consultants. There is nothing that the Caribbean Development Bank loves more than consultants. Nothing. Every single project must have consultants. Everyone. It's an industry. And the Caribbean Development Bank in particular has a fascination for Canadian consultants. It's not often you get them appointing regional consultants, except when it suits their purposes, for example, like assessment of poverty reduction. They may use a firm out of Trinidad whose credentials I myself have great difficulty with, but be that as it may. So the moment the Caribbean Development Bank sees a proposal for consultants, it latches on to it. Latches on to it. And by the time they're finished, they have their consultants all lined up. I think it's interesting because I was hoping the honorable member might have spoken briefly on the experiences with the Bextor drainage project. I'm certain the honorable leader of the opposition, in his capacity as a former minister of infrastructure, would remember the pain he endured with the Caribbean Development Bank over the rehabilitation of Bextor and to resolve the drainage issues confronting the people of Bextor. That CDB had promised to make the allocation of the funds available. They insisted that they be consultants, year in, year out consultants waiting for reports. When they finished with the reports, they insisted they had to engage the public, the people of the community, to tell them what they were proposing. But then when that was finished, months passed, nothing happening, the elections came, and of course today I don't know exactly where the project is. I'm sure the honorable member would not resist it at the right time to disclose to us where that project is. It's true, I know he's a project engineer, so I mean, he would be able to tell us exactly where things are at and whether that's one of those projects that he stopped. Your Bexar project, you know full well.
Drainage.
Your drainage project. The same one, when the honorable member was having community meetings, you arranged for certain of your principal acolytes to attend. I mean, I'm sure you remember that. Now, that having been said, that's a big difference between us. We are always welcoming. But that being said, Mr. Speaker, I just want to issue a word of caution. Just a word of caution, Mr. Speaker. I have had the opportunity to interact with all the major agencies at our doorsteps. World Bank, European Union, Caribbean Development Bank, OFID, you name it, Kuwaiti Fund. But there are three of those who constantly blame lack of implementation on local authorities and local personnel. All the time they do it, Mr. Speaker. You look at the rate of implementation, for example, of the European Union in the Caribbean, and you will discover that that rate of implementation is abysmally low. Abysmally low. Every year you come to the House in a budget, you announce what the allocations are for, and then in the course of the year, you look for the results, they are never there. And whenever you tackle the European Union, they always tell you that it has to do with the lack of capacity in the various governments. I have always contested that, always. Why? For the very reason that the leader of the opposition mentioned earlier on, that for years this country has invested heavily on training civil servants to design and to implement projects. No country in the Eastern Caribbean has invested as heavily as St. Lucia has in training its civil servants to implement, design, whatever it is, where projects are concerned. No country. Even the very same Caribbean Development Bank, for years, year in, year out, it brought in people to CDB and elsewhere to train them how to design projects for the Caribbean Development Bank so that projects could be reviewed, projects could be approved or disapproved or amended as the case may be. Never happened. No change. Question is why? The question is why. And Mr. Speaker, I will share my views because I have never been shy to share them. I have always challenged the European Union to conduct an audit of its procedures. I have always said to the European Union, you do an independent audit of the procedures that you are utilizing to assess projects, to monitor projects. Now you hear a lot of talk about hospitals, Mr. Speaker. The OKEU hospital. Yes, the hospital was the brainchild of the former St. Lucia Labour Party government, and that's one of the problems today. But I'll choose my words on another occasion. But I'll say this. That hospital has now taken over 8 years to bring to life. And I'm not today going to engage in blaming this side over delays or changes they made with the hospital. That's not my point today. And you know why, Mr. Speaker? One of the fundamental reasons why it has taken so long has to do with the European Union, had to do with procurement processes, had to do with the fact that that organization was not able to respond quickly and adeptly to the various proposals and recommendations coming from the public sector functionaries in the country. It has nothing to do, as people assume, with lack of decision in the Ministry of Health or among public officers. It had everything to do with the approach of the European Union because, among other things, in the vast majority of cases, they insisted that when bids had to be created to go out, it had to go out to ensure that interested parties in the member states were given the opportunity to bid. The Caribbean Development Bank is no different. I have always said, and I will continue to say, that the Caribbean Development Bank need to do an audit of its procedures. It could not have been right that after Hurricane Thomas, it took months, literally months, and then gel into years to obtain funding from the Caribbean Development Bank to repair the damage caused by Hurricane Thomas. So today, when the honorable member begins to sing the praise of the Caribbean Development Bank, I have to say he's born again. Born again. What has changed? I don't use that term, born again. I don't. My religious persuasion is of a different kind to yours. So we can ignore that for the time being. So what has changed all of a sudden, Mr. Speaker, that the honorable member is in the embrace of the Caribbean Development Bank to the point that he is so happy and pleased that they have approved this $13.23 million loan, ostensibly for another cycle of planning. We will have time, hopefully, to cast judgment. He says they will develop a sustainable path by the year 2022 when this plan has to come to life. So we'll be around, hopefully, if time is kind to us, to 21, God willing, to make a judgment on whether this supposed training has resolved any issues. But I want to say this, and this is my point, that we can do as much training as we want of public officers and functionaries, about technocrats. The problem is not with them. The problem is with the institutions who have responsibility to make those loans or resources available to you. And unless we understand that and force those institutions to change their ways, we are going to be stuck in mud all over again. Now, Mr. Speaker, I do not wish to enter the realm of political debate, but when you see statements are made that carry the implicit condemnation of previous actions, then you're forced to respond. And I know that my colleagues, both to my left and to my right, has done a sufficient job to respond, but it's interesting that this administration can now come to the House and say, as a member for Castries South says, that we are now going to be developing a vision plan of where we want to go. Forget that it is almost 3 years now, too late. Forget that. Forget that. And it's going to be about results and implementation, howsoever it is dressed up. But I remember just after the elections, the Honorable Prime Minister announced that we are creating a cluster cabinet, because by creating a cluster cabinet, we're going to have a coherent approach. We would be running an efficient government. We'll be implementing a plan. We'll be focused. And of course, Ernst & Young was brought here too. Up to now, we don't know how much they were paid for their contribution to the budget, which I understand that the civil servants were laughing at afterwards. And I made the point last year that there was nothing in that budget that has changed from previous years. And if Ernst & Young knew what it was doing, it would never have accepted to do any contract in St. Lucia because of conflict of interest. Never. Never, ever. Because it is representing clients here. Clients that deal with the government of St. Lucia. Never have done it, but that's a different matter for another time. But what have we seen with the cluster cabinet? Step by step, it has been dismantled. The final rights were given to the cluster cabinet a few days ago when certain individuals were elevated to ministerial positions. Now, I don't know. I'm not asking any questions. I don't want any explanations. I don't know whether some motion of no confidence had something to do with it while these changes were made. But all I know, the inspiration from a prime minister called Holness out of Jamaica finally entered a deep hole, and mercifully St. Lucia was spared the consequences of it. Today, we have now returned to what essentially is an orthodox cabinet as the Westminster system prescribed. Well, maybe except two, but these you can forgive for good reason. And in time, the good reason of which I speak will become clearer. The question, Mr. Speaker, is this: what will be the results of these supposed workshops, etc.? And I have said before, in a previous contribution to this House, that one of the big problems that we have with regional organizations is accountability. It'd be interesting to see this outcome of this magnum opus of CDB, which the member says that CDB is busy doing elsewhere, but they have chosen St. Lucia first to do it. So I hope that when the minister has got everything in place and the plan is completed, that it will be presented to this House, at least to recognize that this House considered the motion before it for this $13.2 million. As for me, Mr. Speaker, I'm not supporting this motion. This is unnecessary. I do not believe that our civil servants should be sidelined. I believe that we have competent, well-educated civil servants. I believe we have sound technocrats in our public service. I believe that those technocrats know exactly what the country requires, but the issue has always been one of political leadership. And with all the avowed skills of honorable members on the other side, I would have hoped that they would have been able to use their political leadership to harness this vast army of skills that exists in the public service. Alas, we have now to turn again to external consultants to give us the guidance that we need. So for me, Mr. Speaker, conscience or no conscience, I make it absolutely clear that I will not be supporting this motion before the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable members, I have been informed that the students of SOAFA must or have to leave at this present time. I would like to take the opportunity to thank them for being here to see the proceedings of Parliament live. I hope that they had the opportunity to learn something, and that when they return to the institution, they could surely impart some knowledge to their fellow students. So thank you very much, students and teachers, for coming. You may leave if you so wish to. Honourable Member for Ancillary Canneries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I stand, Mr. Speaker, to give my staunchest support to this motion brought forward by the Minister for Finance and the Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I give my support to this, Mr. Speaker, because we would have seen in this Honourable House that the question of implementation and effective implementation has been a perennial problem that has afflicted our country, Mr. Speaker, over decades. And if I went through the budget statements made by the former Minister of Finance and former Prime Minister, member for Vieux-Fort South, who went before me, Mr. Speaker, we would see that he would have referenced a litany of examples whereby productivity and implementation would have been a major developmental issue that has confronted us as a small island developing state. But notwithstanding that, Mr. Speaker, this initiative, which our government is undertaking and embarking upon, in partnership with the PAMDU organization out of Malaysia, is one that is very timely, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you see in small countries like ours, where we lack the resources and where we may lack the economies of scale, Mr. Speaker, it becomes even more imperative that we compensate for that with the economies of speed, and that we, Mr. Speaker, ensure that we leverage and maximize the efficiencies that small countries like us need. But, Mr. Speaker, you see, when you focus on efficiencies of implementation in areas like healthcare and education, what you do, Mr. Speaker, is that you create a more enabling environment. You create, Mr. Speaker, an environment whereby the people will be better assisted with their health care services, and which is why I stand to give my support for this. The education system, Mr. Speaker, is one of the areas that is being targeted in these workshops, is so important and so timely and so necessary, Mr. Speaker, as we search for challenges, as we look for opportunities and solutions to answer some of the challenges that we face in the education system. And so while my friends on the other side play politics, Mr. Speaker, we will thrust forward strategically to ensure that we bring about opportunity, we bring about prosperity. Mr. Speaker, areas like tourism and infrastructure are also being targeted under the workshops. And this specific project, Mr. Speaker, aimed at ensuring that we have a research-oriented approach to the development and implementation of the various policies, Mr. Speaker, and the development of the policies, and to ensure, Mr. Speaker, that there's a timeliness with which they reach the rank and file of the local populace, as you will. Mr. Speaker, the question of a lack of implementation has afflicted so many governments, regardless of political persuasion. And when we look at the capital budgets and what governments aspire to do in comparison to the rate of their implementation or the actual, Mr. Speaker, you would see that there's a tremendous shortfall. And this, Mr. Speaker, has accounted for significant momentum that was lost in economic growth and development growth in our country, Mr. Speaker. And so this is absolutely necessary. Mr. Speaker, before I go any further, though, I heard with amusement and amazement, and I wasn't going to speak, a whole ton of aspersions, a whole ton of pronouncements made on the other side, Mr. Speaker, and I want to choose my words carefully, because I couldn't believe my ears at some of the things I was hearing. But what they did, Mr. Speaker, is that they confirmed to me that all the opposition is concerned about as it pertains to the various issues confronting our country at this time is politics. And so they will come to this honorable House, Mr. Speaker, and they will oppose for opposing's sake. We asked the member for Labrie, for example, who went on to say that the debt to GDP ratio was so bad, and it was terrible. But yet the member, Mr. Speaker, had absolutely no clue what the present debt to GDP rate is when he was asked by members on this side to tell us what the actual figure was.
Member for Ancillary Canary. Are you going to be listed on the line? Then
Mr. Speaker, on a point of order.
You know, the Speaker, are you the Speaker?
Why don't you become Deputy Speaker?
Honorable Member for Library. Honorable Member for Library. Honorable Member for Library. There's no need for what you just said. There was no need for what you just said.
What who just said?
What you just said.
Oh, no, but he was trying to instruct me, like he's the Speaker. I recognize you as the authority in this chamber.
Yes?
No, don't try to help me.
Honorable Member, you stood on a point of
Yes,
order. Just indicate.
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Speaker is misleading the House. I never proceeded to describe anything about GDP, except that when you continue to borrow, the debt to GDP ratio will increase.
Very well.
And when you add 400 million to it, it will increase significantly. And when there is debt to GDP ratio increasing, it narrows room for fiscal maneuver. Okay? So, no, let me tell you, I was elected in this House just like you.
Honorable Member for Library.
Thank you, sir.
Honorable Member for Ancillary Canaries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to quote the member for Library, he went on to say that the debt to GDP ratio was already so bad. And Mr. Speaker, if you're going to make a statement like that, then it is only reasonable to know what the rate of debt to GDP ratio is. Is it 60%? Is it 70%? How high is high? And so, Mr. Speaker, that is the point that we're making, that we come to this honorable House, and all we are concerned about on this side is to create deception, is to create smoke screens, is to try, Mr. Speaker, to create perceptions that are false, to misrepresent facts, Mr. Speaker. So when you make that pronouncement, you have to then be able, Mr. Speaker, to substantiate what the rate of the debt to GDP ratio is. And so that is the point, Mr. Speaker, is that this workshop, in many ways, it ensures that you don't make assumptions on what the developmental indicators are, but, Mr. Speaker, that you're able to properly quantify them And a large degree of this workshop, Mr. Speaker, is dealing with issues like these, where we're not dealing with emotions, and we're not dealing with blanket statements. But, Mr. Speaker, we're dealing with facts, we're dealing with figures, and our development positions and the way forward and our strategic approach to the various issues, Mr. Speaker, will be based on research and empirical evidence, not on blank statements that we have seen, Mr. Speaker, not just in this debate here today, but it has characterized the entire debate and position of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, another case in point, you see that they take positions always, some of the very positions that they themselves implemented while they were in government, like dolphin parks, for example. We see that if we had left it up to them, they would have had not one but 2 dolphin parks that their cabinet sat and approved, Mr. Speaker, and cabinet conclusions will back that up. And so this is the point. If you are going to tell the country and the nation on national television that the debt to GDP ratio is bad, then you should at least be able to quantify what that rate is. And that's the point. And that's the fundamental point. And so, Mr. Speaker, it is not a time to misrepresent the facts. That's dangerous. That, Mr. Speaker, is disingenuous. What we need to do is, if we don't have a problem with anyone criticizing our policies, but bring some facts. Mr. Speaker, today we heard all kinds of aspersions about debt that is spiraling. And there was no mention at all about the new revenues which are being created. No one took the time to say that the airport development tax has increased by $78 per passenger.
That's the fact.
A fact. And when you multiply that by 400,000, Mr. Speaker, which is where the current arrivals will be, Mr. Speaker, the impact on the revenue over the lifetime of the loan that we're taking from the people from Taiwan, the government of Taiwan, Mr. Speaker, is going to arrive somewhere close to $1.5 billion in new revenue. $1.5 billion just in the stayover arrivals. And that's a very conservative estimate, right, Mr. Speaker? Based on that one position alone. And we have made it absolutely clear on this side that our borrowing will not be done in isolation, but our borrowing will be done with accompanied revenue stream where possible. And we've made that clear, and we've always said it. Mr. Speaker, you see that the gas tax that we've implemented, we came in and we realized that the opposition was underinvesting in road maintenance in this country. And what did we do? We didn't go and just borrow money. We had the foresight, we were honest, we were transparent with our people, and we said that we have a shortfall in the road maintenance budget, and in order to meet that shortfall and to give you the kind of services and the road infrastructure that you do deserve, that we need to ensure that we can raise the money to adequately maintain our roads. And so, Mr. Speaker, if you look at the road maintenance, the gas tax, Mr. Speaker, and the airport development tax, Mr. Speaker, these two policy positions alone nears $100 million in new revenue stream for our country per year, per annum. 100 million in new revenue. So we're not just carrying up debt, we're also raising revenue. We're also making sure, Mr. Speaker, that our fiscal indicators are sound. And this is what we're about, Mr. Speaker. But who else would you listen to? These are the same members, Mr. Speaker, that indicated that we would lose $52 million in VAT. What has been the performance of the VAT collection? What has been the performance, Mr. Speaker? Better than it was last year. Despite, Mr. Speaker, despite our decision to relieve the people of St. Lucia of the rate of VAT imposed by this administration, the administration on the previous administration, at a 15% rate. And we're still convinced that it is too high. But what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, here is making sure that we have a measured approach towards the implementation of various taxes that will, one, buttress economic growth, and that will, one, Mr. Speaker, maintain the fiscal integrity of St. Lucia. Right? And so, Mr. Speaker, they said that the airport development tax was going to hurt tourism. We grew by 11%. 11% last year. And year to date, Mr. Speaker, we're up 3%. Right? 3.7 over a year where we had an 11% growth in tourism. So, Mr. Speaker, you see, I'm so bored. I'm so bored, I'm so amused, Mr. Speaker, and unenlightened by the uneducated, unsound, and empty positions taken by the opposition on a range of issues. Because they clearly...
Honorable members, allow the member for ancillary canneries to make his presentation.
So thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. You see the facts, they really, really do hurt. And so, Mr. Speaker, who would you listen to? I mean, the previous administration, and I didn't say this, the ECCB said this, right? The ECCB said this, that the previous administration presided over the slowest growing economy in the Monetary Council. And that is their accomplishment. That is their reputation. The slowest growing economy. So how could you come now to lecture on economics and to make pronouncements on economics when your own record is nothing but failure? You presided over closure of businesses. You presided over the contraction of the economy. You presided over an economy that really hurt a number of people. How can we possibly listen to your madness? We cannot. We cannot. We cannot. And so, Mr. Speaker, I give this, Mr. Speaker, my staunchest support. And I have no doubt, Mr. Speaker, that we will see, Mr. Speaker, great returns from this investment. It is not the first time that a government has appointed consultants. This government has engaged in that practice before. Mr. Speaker, we are in a very small country with very limited human and financial resources. And Mr. Speaker, we have to ensure that we leverage every single professional advice that we can receive for the development of our country, for the betterment of our people. And so, Mr. Speaker, I thank you very much.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I beg that we suspend the House for lunch for 1 hour and return at 2:15.
Honorable members, the question is that this House stands suspended until 2:15 in the afternoon. I now put a question. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. This House is suspended until 2:15 p.m.